Hey folks, this is Evgeny from Easy Automations, and this is the course that will teach you how to integrate custom-trained bots based on the GPT Assistant technology natively into Heartbeat. The way that we're gonna go in this course is first we're gonna understand the general concept of this automation and how we're gonna design it and what we're gonna integrate with what, and then we're gonna integrate it. So we're going to implement everything live and test it. And when I say implement it live, I'm not just gonna walk you through pre-built workflows. We're actually going to build them together, and you will see me building them live with all of the errors and mistakes and all the testing that you would need to do if you were to build something like this from scratch. Okay, so let's get started, and let's first talk about the tools and the accounts that we're going to need. So in terms of the tools and accounts that we'll need, obviously we're going to need Heartbeat. Heartbeat is the community tool that we're going to be using. You can implement the same concepts with a different platform that gives you access to its API, either directly or through integration tools, but we're going to be focusing on Heartbeat. Then you will need an integration platform. So we're going to be using Pabbly Connect for this integration. You can also use active pieces if you want, or technically speaking, any other platforms that allow you to work with arrays. So Pabbly has an amazing module that's called the code block, which we're going to be using quite extensively, even though you don't need to know how to code, because I'm going to give you all the code snippets. But just so that if the tool knows how to iterate arrays, then you can probably use it. I've tested this integration with both Pabbly Connect and active pieces. I think Pabbly is probably an easier one to use, so I'm going to recommend that you get Pabbly Connect. So you should have a link in the course. You should have the link just below this video. It's an affiliate link, so if you purchase a lifetime subscription to Pabbly Connect, I'm going to get a little something from them. But it's a brilliant platform. I use it myself. In fact, I use it both together with active pieces. We're going to be using Pabbly for this course. Then you'll need a account with Google Sheets. It doesn't matter if you just have a regular Gmail account and Google Drive and Google Sheets that come with it, or you have a workspace edition. We need Google Sheets because we're going to be implementing the native API or OpenAI Assistants, which organizes conversations with the assistant bots in Threads. And the minute we start doing that, we will need Google Sheets. I'll explain to you why we need to do that. But I trust that everyone in this world has a free Google Sheets account, and it allows you to store 2 million cells. So it's more than enough to power the operations of your chatbot. And obviously you need OpenAI. You're going to be using the OpenAI API. You need a paid account. So make sure to either subscribe to a post-paid plan or add some credits to your account, because you're going to be using this subscription to OpenAI, and make sure you have API keys saved for everything. So for Google Sheets, you don't need an API key, but for Heartbeat, you need to generate and save an API key, and you need to do the same for OpenAI. Cool. Now let's talk about how OpenAI Assistants actually work. What are OpenAI Assistants? OpenAI Assistants is a new functionality that OpenAI brought about, I believe, in November, the year 2023. What they allow to do is for the GPT models to be, quote unquote, trained on custom knowledge. So the reason why the word trained is in brackets, or in quotes rather, is because technically speaking, it's not training, but retrieval of information. Essentially what they do is they do what Chatbase and other startups have implemented before OpenAI got to it. So essentially, at some point in time, we all realized that large language models, they don't actually have any knowledge of any of our specific areas. For example, if you wanted to implement let's say a bot that can answer questions about your product, as opposed to the users having to use your knowledge base. So you would want the bot to have somehow access to its knowledge base. If you just integrate pure vanilla GPT, 3, 4, doesn't matter, they don't have access to any of this information. And the only way we would used to be able to do that is by actually custom building an AI model or fine-tuning a GPT model, which is expensive, difficult, and for most small business and startup purposes, probably not required or a bit too much. Custom retrieval, a retrieval of information or a retrieval of custom knowledge, is basically you giving the bot context about essentially a memory, not only of the previous messages that were exchanged between you and the bot, but of information stored in your documents as well. So what it does is essentially it allows you to upload your documents or knowledge sources into the assistant's memory, and then OpenAI splits the text in these documents into chunks and stores them in their own searchable database. And so when someone then queries this assistant will determine whether it has the knowledge natively built into the model, or if it doesn't, it will go ahead and search through this database that contains the chunks that OpenAI extracted from your documents. And then these chunks are then fed as a context into the model before it responds. So that's how it works. Now, the cool thing about the OpenAI Assistant API is that it organizes all conversations into threads, essentially by automatically loading the entire history of messages between you, the user, and the assistant in the same thread. We will be integrating the threads functionality of OpenAI Assistants with Heartbeat. So essentially, the minute someone starts a Heartbeat thread in the channel where the assistant will work, it will create a thread in OpenAI. And so that's essentially if any other user will want to follow up on any questions in the same thread, then we will make sure that all the messages in this thread will be pulled into the conversation, and the assistant will know the context of all other questions and answers in the same thread, which will make our integration a little bit more complicated, but I believe it's the right thing to do, and also for you guys to learn how these things work. Let's dive in a little bit deeper into how OpenAI Assistants actually work. So this is the normal GPT workflow, which if you've ever tried to integrate GPT into any other tools, and I'm not necessarily referring to you using ChatGPT as a consumer product from OpenAI, but I'm referring to, you trying to connect OpenAI's GPT module in Pabbly, Zapier, Make, Active Pieces, or anywhere else with some other tools. Typically, the way this works is there is some sort of prompt that you give to the model. You include some information to this prompt. Then you send this prompt into a request to OpenAI's completion API. Now, some tools like Zapier, for example, and like Active Pieces, they offer you an option to use a memory key. Essentially, it gives the model memory of previous conversations. It's an easy way of doing it. And then the model processes or works on the prompt from the user. And if you supplied a memory key, or if you included the previous conversations or previous messages between the user and the assistant into the API request, processes them all and spits out the result. And rinse and repeat. That's basically how it works. And if we were to look at something like Pabbly and just look at how the integration module will look like, as you can see, all you need to do to get this module to run is to select the module, to select the model. In this case, we've selected GPT-4, and then to supply a prompt. And that's it. That's all you need. The model then will spit out an answer, and then you can include it somewhere else. Now, assistants have a slightly different workflow within OpenAI. Let me show you how they work. Essentially, the way assistants work is that OpenAI introduced 3 concepts in November when they launched these assistants. The concept number 1 is the actual assistant. So what's an assistant? It is a model with some sort of base prompt or system prompt and any of the files that you want to add to this model. So this is essentially when you are giving your OpenAI assistant knowledge, you give it to the assistant. So you create an assistant, call it whatever you want. For example, on this In this image, it's a personal finance bot, and you upload any of the files that you want the bot to have access to. And as soon as you upload these files and you do this in your OpenAI account, that assistant will have access to them and the assistant will make them searchable for OpenAI. And as soon as the assistant understands that in order to answer a particular message from a user, the assistant needs to access those files, it will do. Then there is the concept of a thread. So a thread is essentially space where conversations or where messages between the users and the assistant are stored, and they're stored sequentially. So all prompts from users and all assistant responses will go into a thread. So essentially it's a storage, it's a memory of sorts. It's an object that stores all the conversation that has been happening. And again, thinking ahead, you can imagine that Heartbeat organizes its discussions in the discussion channels in Threads. And so we will be mirroring those discussions in OpenAI. And then there's a concept of runs. So a run essentially feeds a thread to the assistant to process and add the response to the thread in the end. So it's a little bit different to how a simple GPT works, but that's effectively how the assistant works. A top level schematic of what you would need to do in order to process conversations through the assistant work is, first of all, you need to create an assistant. And you do this in your OpenAI account, and this is what we're going to do. Then you need to create a thread or use an existing thread. If there is an existing thread, you need to add a message to this thread as the user message. Then you need to tell the assistant to run this thread, as in process all the messages in this thread. And then what happens is the assistant starts running the thread, starts processing the messages in there in order to add a message in the end, which is the response of the assistant. However, while the normal GPT would just respond and output the response, which you will then get from your Pabbly module response, and then you can integrate with other modules. Here, it doesn't do that. So essentially, once it's ran the thread, it will mark this particular run status as completed, and it will just sit there. It will not send you a message, it will not notify you. And so you have to constantly check the status of the run, whether it's completed or not. And once you've checked it and you realize that it's completed, then you need to list all the thread messages and extract the last message, which will be the assistant's response to the thread. And then essentially that last message then needs to be fed into Heartbeat as the response of this assistant. So it's a little bit more complicated than just the question answer prompt response architecture of the base GPT that you would have been used to. And OpenAI, by the way, is fully aware. While they've created a very useful thing, they've also made it very difficult. Not very difficult, but somewhat more complicated to use. And they've already committed to fixing this for the future. But for now, this is what it is. And we'll just have to live with it. But we can perfectly live with it. And I'll show you how to do it once we start implementing. But just to give you an example of what you would need to do in Pabbly. So remember, to run a GPT, just a normal GPT model, all you need to do is just do this, right? You give it a prompt and the module will produce a response from the module. To run an assistant in Pabbly, these are the modules that you will be using to create an assistant, create thread, create message, create run, list messages, and we will also be using API calls to OpenAI to check the status of the run, which Pabbly doesn't have. We won't need to create assistants, so we'll do this, but we won't need to use the Pabbly's module to create the assistant. We'll do this manually in the OpenAI playground, but creating threads, creating messages, creating runs, and listing messages, we're going to be using all of these modules. How we're going to connect OpenAI assistants with Heartbeat. Here's an example. I've created a test community here, and what I want you to have a look at here is essentially what we're going to be doing. If you see, I have pointed the assistant to work in the general channel, which is currently selected. And as you can see, I've started a thread. So I've created an assistant that is trained on a MacBook instruction manual. Treat it as an Apple genius who just operates in your Heartbeat channel. You can obviously imagine how you can train the assistant on just about any piece of knowledge or pieces of knowledge that you have. I started the thread when I said, how do I adjust brightness? And then the assistant responded, and then I followed up by tagging the assistant, and the assistant responded again. So this is how it will work. Now, notice that when I created a thread, I didn't need to tag the assistant, but when I wanted a follow-up inside a thread, I did need to tag the assistant. This has to do with the current structure of Heartbeat's API and the kind of webhook messages that they're sending. I did, at the time of the recording of this course, add a request to their team to actually remove the requirement of having to tag anyone in thread responses for the Heartbeat to send the webhook notifications. But for now, this is what it is. So that's just something for you to remember. So in order to build this integration, we will need two workflows. First workflow is so a new thread is created in Heartbeat, and then at the end of the workflow, the assistant will respond to the message that started this thread. So a very rough schematic, and when I say rough, these are just the key modules that we're going to be actioning within Pabbly, but there will be other modules in between, so you will see, but just for you to understand the overall design of our integration is, so our trigger is a new thread in a specific channel that you will designate for your assistant to live and respond to messages. Now, is this a necessary requirement? No, but it'll just make things easier. You'll designate the channel where your assistant will work, and then this is where it will respond to new threads. We will need to extract the message from the opening of the thread. And then we'll need to create a corresponding thread in OpenAI. We will need to add the message that someone left in Heartbeat to the OpenAI thread. Then we will run this newly created thread through the assistant. And then once the assistant added its message to the thread, which would be the last message in the thread, we will need to pipe it back into Heartbeat and effectively respond to the opening thread message with the assistant's response. So that's the first workflow. The second workflow is with a different trigger. It's the new comment in the thread with the mention of the assistant, and the assistant will, at the end of the workflow, respond to it. This workflow will start with the new comment with the assistant being mentioned in the designated channel. Then we will need to extract this message and the ID of the thread. Then we will need to locate the corresponding OpenAI thread, which would have been created already when someone started the thread. Then we will need to add the message that someone left in the Heartbeat thread into the corresponding OpenAI thread. Then we run it through the assistant, and then we pipe the assistant response back into the Heartbeat thread, responding to someone who left the message in that thread. So that's roughly speaking how this will work. The question that I think we need to respond to is, why do we need Google Sheets? So we need Google Sheets for two reasons. The first reason, so see the image on the left, is we want to organize conversations in your channel in Heartbeat where the assistant will be living and answering to questions in the same way as the assistant conversations work in OpenAI. In other words, we're going to organize them by thread. And in order to do that, we need to have a little mapping table which will match a Heartbeat thread ID with an OpenAI thread ID. Now, we could have skipped it and we could have just used a very rough integration where whether it's a new thread in the channel or a comment with a mention, we will always start and run a new thread in OpenAI. But I think this would be a very sloppy integration, and especially seeing as Heartbeat gives us a great way to organize conversations in the threads, and seeing as OpenAI does the same with its assistants API. So that's why we're just going to make things a little bit more complicated and spend a few more Pabbly operations, but we're going to give users the best user experience that we can. So this is what we're going to do. And that's why, because we need to keep track of all the threads that are being created in Heartbeat and all the corresponding threads that are being created in OpenAI. We just need a mapping table that will match one ID to the other. The second table that we need is we need to keep track of thread runs that have been published, that have been piped into Heartbeat. Now, we need this because, as I mentioned before, the Assistants API currently doesn't send you notification when the assistant added the message into, so we have to keep checking for it. And because we have to keep checking for the run status to be completed, we need to essentially stop piping the messages back into Heartbeat as soon as we found out that the run is complete. Otherwise, if you don't have this table of published runs, you will see that the assistant will be responding in Heartbeat multiple times to the same message. So we need to prevent that. Now, again, everyone has access to Google Sheets. Google Sheets can store 2 million cells. I think with just one Google Sheet and multiple tables inside this Google Sheet, you're going to be set up for life. And you don't have to worry about anything else. I think that's it. That's enough with the theory. What we're going to do now is we're going to go into our OpenAI playground, and I'm going to show you a demo of how assistants actually work on the assistant that I have built, the one that was trained on the MacBook instruction manual. Let's get into it.